size before landfall tomorrow night. Evacuations have been ordered for more than 1 million people. The head of MI5's revealed the scale of children being investigated for terrorism in arrest speech. Ken McCullum says 1 in 8 people under investigation are under 18 and warned online propaganda is drawing them to extreme right-wing ideologies. Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, told LBC it's down to the online ecosystem.
There is this sort of echo chamber that can be propelled by the online links from jihadist organisations, and that's actually what we've seen with a growing stream of jihadist propaganda, particularly since 7/7.
There's a new frontrunner in the Tory leadership race. James Cleverly's overtaken Robert Jenrick in the lead after Tom Tugendhat was eliminated. And it looks like HS2 will reach central London, despite work on the stretch to Euston being suspended. Transport Secretary Louise Haigh says there could be an announcement later this month. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 113 points at 81.90. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.19. LBC weather: scattered heavy showers will clear for many, patchy rain in the northeast and a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. We have a very noisy panel tonight already. It's 2 minutes past 8. Joining me are Lucy Powell, Labour leader of the House of Commons and MP for Manchester Central. Next to her is Lord Willetts, David Willetts, Conservative peer who's the Universities Minister in the coalition government. Next to me on my right, Cindy Yu, Assistant Editor of the Spectator. And next to her, John Crace, Parliamentary sketch writer for The Guardian. They're here to answer your questions. You can call 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. Say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And, of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Whenever we have John Crace on the programme, my text screen, it just always has positive things to say about you. And here's the first one. John Crace, thank you for the summary of the disgraced, proven liar, former PM Boris Johnson. John Crace, genius, end of. It's always downhill from there on this programme, I'm afraid, John.
That's all right. My family take a close interest in my movements.
Right, let's go to the first question. It's a text question from Callum in Newbury. It's a very short one. What's behind the Cleverly surge? Now, James Cleverly was third in the first round of the Tory leadership contest, trailing Robert Jenrick by 7 votes, with that gap increasing to 12 in the second round. But today's third round vote saw Cleverly gain 17 votes, while Jenrick lost 2. David Willetts, as the only one around this table that's been a candidate in a Conservative leadership contest, let's go to you first.
Well, I think James gave an affable, approachable performance at the Tory conference, and he made a plea for the leadership to be normal, which was a bold move and seems to have got some support from parliamentarians. Now, there's 3 candidates. I haven't come out for any of the candidates, but he clearly had...
Now's your opportunity.
I don't think my endorsement of any value whatsoever. It might even have a negative effect. But I think he had a good conference. And that's reflected. And what is interesting in this, I think, is that the Parliamentary Party, there's a sort of is responding to what it observed at the party conference and how the membership at the party conference responded to the performances by the leading candidates.
I think that is interesting, isn't it? But there's a lot of people who think that the whole system of electing a Conservative leader needs to be reformed. We had a caller on in the last hour who said, well, it should be the members who whittle it down to 2 and then the MPs vote between the 2. Have you got any sympathy for that?
I do think that for both the Conservative Party and, of course, the Labour Party has been through something similar. One of the advantages of a parliamentary system is that by the time someone is a candidate for cabinet position or Prime Minister, a lot of colleagues have got to know them and have got to know their strengths and weaknesses. And that assessment by parliamentarians of who's best able to hack it, I think, is of great value. I personally think it was wrong of William Hague to move to the leadership being elected by the membership, and he has he has subsequently said he regrets that. It was all part of a great vision. We're going to have 1 million Tory members. We sadly don't have 1 million Tory members. So I think anything that empowers the parliamentarians who have a close knowledge of people's performance is a good thing.
Trouble is, you can't take away democracy once you've given it, can you?
And no, I think it would be very hard to do that. But you could imagine things, including whoever is second at the end of the parliamentary process, saying that they're not going to take the debate to the country, that they're going to stand down. That would be one way forward, and it would in turn also mean that the Conservative Party had a new leader in place in time for the big budget statement on the 30th of October.
Yes, that is ridiculous timing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lucy Powell, let's come to you. You've witnessed a couple of Labour leadership contests in your time in the Commons. What do you think is behind the Cleverly surge?
Well, I thought when you were bringing in David and you started your sentence with, as the only person around the panel who, I thought you were going to say, actually cared. Then you had another segue into it. But no, I'm joking aside. I mean, actually, I know we're not allowed to bet on these things anymore.
No.
But I said back in July that I thought the person for me who I thought was their best option and their best candidate was James Cleverly, and at that point he was quite behind in things. So he is a good communicator. I've always thought he's a good communicator. He's good in Parliament. Obviously I've got no skin in the game, I'm just sort of observing it.
You do, because surely it's in your interest to have a viable, good opposition.
Well, it's not necessarily in our interest, but I mean, it's good for democracy.
Bluffing or double bluffing?
I'm not double bluffing. I'm not double bluffing. I think what you do get to see, I'm in the chamber quite a lot in my job, and you see people perform, and I've always thought he was a good parliamentary performer. I think he's a good communicator. I think he is relatable. That obviously came across a bit more in their conference last week, but whoever wins it's going to be a very, very difficult job for them. I think it was sort of slightly strange that at their conference they were all sort of buoyed up, the kind of warm...
It was odd, because having been at Liverpool the previous week, I mean, I'm not saying it was a depressing conference, but the atmosphere was not as good as it was at the Tory conference, and it was inexplicable in some ways.
Well, it's the warm bath of opposition, which took us a long time to get our party out of the comfort of, which is you can have whatever policy you want without really any accountability. You don't really need to stress test things or to make things add up or be deliverable and all of that. When you're that far out of being in government again, there is some comfort in the warm bath that you can soak yourself in, and that's a real danger for them, I think. And we paid a long price for sitting in that warm bath for a long time.
But it's all come right now.
It has, just about.
Just about. John Crace.
I think, David nailed it really when he said that Cleverly came through by saying we must become normal. And that seemed to me like a very low bar for an opposition, really. If you're just trying to say, let's try and look like ordinary people that the rest of the country can identify with. But James can clearly do that. I'm not sure. There's been a lot of talk now that he is the favourite, but I'm not sure that, assuming that he gets through to the last two tomorrow, that there's any guarantee that propels him straight into leader of the opposition, because, again, as David was saying, it is the Tory membership who will ultimately decide. And this is the Tory membership that decided that Liz Truss was the right person instead of Rishi Sunak, and that sort of ended in disaster.
But it was also the Tory membership that decided David Cameron was the right choice in preference to David Davis. And I suspect, David, you were in Parliament then, if Michael Portillo had got that extra vote in 2001, he would have been up against Ian Duncan Smith and would have probably beaten Ian Duncan Smith at the time.
I think he would have done, yeah.
And there's a lot of lazy journalism, I think, goes on here, where people think the Tory membership, they're all so right-wing, they'll always vote for the most right-wing candidate. They voted for Boris Johnson, not because he was right-wing, but because they wanted to get Brexit done. It was just as simple as that, I would have thought.
I don't know. I don't know who the Tory membership are. I get the feeling at the moment that they are to the right of where most Tory voters are. I mean, that may
That
be
would be
wrong.
the same for the Labour Party. You'd probably agree with that. Labour Party members are probably a bit to the left of where the Labour Parliamentary Party are.
Yeah, possibly. But we've got a bigger membership, so I always think these things are better served when you've got a broader base. I mean, the Conservative membership's become very small, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you should remember the membership have got a whole host of things they care about. I think probably for James, one of his other advantages is having had military service. I mean, that kind of counts.
Albeit in Luton.
It didn't work for Tom Tugendhat. Tom couldn't get through a sentence without reminding us that he served the military and might have to kill us at some stage.
But at least his dad wasn't a toolmaker.
Yeah. These tropes, they do get tired so quickly, don't they?
Right, Cindy, you.
I think also what explains the Cleverly surge is the fact that Jenrick doesn't sound very persuasive when he's trying to do this right-winger thing, and the conference really showed that.
And there's a reason for that, isn't there? Because he's not actually a right-winger.
Well, that's what so many Conservative Party members think. So, to the point of, do they always vote for the most right-wing candidate? Jenrick, on paper, is technically, in some ways, more right-wing than Kemi Badenoch. He's asking us, for example, to be taken out of the ECHR. But the members just don't seem to be buying it. And actually, his support fell after conference. So I think that's a consideration. The fact that Kemi Badenoch is just a bit inconsistent as a performer. That maternity pay row was probably quite avoidable, and the way that she dealt with it is something that James Cleverly hasn't really, just being more of a consistent media performer.
Well, he did have that
broadcast
rather
rounds.
awkward moment about the Rohypnol joke, didn't he? Remember that?
No, what was that?
He's had a few.
Even his wife was furious with him about that. So, they've all had their moments. Have you had a moment like that, Lucy?
Many, I'm sure.
But Cindy, you've got a new editor of The Spectator now.
I do.
He's always been a supporter of Kemi Badenoch. Is The Spectator going to come out for her?
Reportedly, he has been a supporter of Kemi Badenoch. I've not had those conversations with Michael Gove, our new editor. I think he's now a journalist. He's not a politician anymore.
Yeah, but it's usual for a newspaper, particularly like The Spectator, to say, well, this is where we think the Tory party should
editorially,
go.
the only thing that we've ever taken an explicit position on is Brexit, to vote for Brexit. And actually, with Tory leadership, we don't really actually come out either way.
I can confirm that I was astonished because when I was at the Tory party conference for the four leaders or would-be leaders' speeches on the Wednesday morning, and sitting right behind me in the press seats were Michael Gove and George Osborne, which rather took me by surprise. There was some...
Are your ears flapping?
They moved quite quickly when they realised that they were behind a gaggle of sketch writers.
I can imagine.
I think there was one other feature of the conference, which is that the party membership is very worried about immigration, just like across the rest of the country. But the argument, we have to exit something in order to solve it, and that the ECHR is the trump card to play, which I think Robert Jenrick put a lot of weight on. I didn't think that was necessarily carrying people and persuading them that it was the only and effective route to do it. It may be that just saying we're going to exit another international organisation is not seen as necessarily the automatic solution.
And then Tom Tugendhat, the first thing he did was say, well, I could be persuaded to do that as well, which, bear in mind that he was from the other side of the party.
He came out in a Telegraph op-ed that day saying that, but he wouldn't then repeat it in the broadcast round. So it's like, some advisors clearly said this is what the ground that you need to do, but he couldn't actually bring himself to say that, and which is even more a symptom that he doesn't believe that's the position he should be taking. Jenrick is clearly doing a better act. Some people will say it's an act, but clearly some members just not buying it either.
Well, I've done hour-long interviews and phone-ins with all four of them. Robert Jenrick was on last night, and he has the ability, for somebody who is seen by people on the left as being a bit extreme, he comes across as incredibly moderate, which I think is probably quite a good talent to have in a leader if you are going to say some of these things that some of us might blanch at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, look, I think it's right to have a contest. I was one of the people who wanted a long contest. I now regret this interaction with the 30th of October budget statement. But I remember 2005, and I think the more that the party has an open debate about what it needs to do, how it needs to get back in touch with a lot of voters, how it needs to raise its game, the better. And I hope after this is over, we won't suddenly say total loyalty requires no disagreement about the direction the party is now permitted. The more it's openly discussed, the better.
Look, I remember from 2005 when you were supporting David Davis, but there were rumours that you might defect to David Cameron. Andrew Mitchell tells me this story that he was talking about this to George Osborne, And George Osborne said, well, with David, it was a bit like he was escaping from a prison. So we had him by the arms going over the wall, but you had him by the legs.
Well, at least I've been photoed, but those are the days. Yeah.
Right, we'll move on and talk about lots of other subjects. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
16 minutes past 8. Lucy Powell, Labour's leader of the House of Commons, MP for Manchester Central, is with us. Lord Willetts, Conservative peer. Cindy Yu, assistant editor of The Spectator. And John Crace, parliamentary sketch writer for The Guardian and author of this magnificent tome. Great cover. If you're a dog lover, you just want to buy it because of the cover, frankly. I mean, forget the contents, John.
Fair enough.
Does that look anything like the real dog?
Yes.
I mean, how did you get the idea? Just explain what the plot is and how you got the idea to do it.
Well, I mean, I'll start sort of at a macro level, which was that...
Never mind, you've got about 45 seconds.
First thought was a lot of people kind of thinking that after the last 10 years in British politics, a dog could have done better. And then I thought, my dog is exactly the age to have done better because he's 13, so he's only ever known a Tory government and a Tory government that has become progressively more chaotic. So I had this idea that maybe Herbie wasn't a stay-at-home dog and that he was a dog that wanted to engage in the world of work. And he met Sadiq Khan's Labrador on Tooting Bec Common, who told him there was a vacancy in Ed Miliband's office. And so he went for an interview with Ed. Ed Miliband offered him the job. Ed said, "Can you drive?" And he said, "No, you idiot. I'm a dog. My paws don't reach the pedals." But that, having sort of manoeuvred around that bit, he then looked after Ed during the 2015 election, lost his job, but then fortunately was re-employed by David Cameron to work on the Vote Remain as the Labour kind of liaison officer for Vote Remain in Number 10. And since then, he has been an advisor to every single Prime Minister and to Keir Starmer in opposition.
I've got to read this book. Lucy Powell, you were an advisor to Ed Miliband, weren't you? Did you meet
done my
Herbie?
job better than me, I'm sure, clearly.
Right, let's move on to a text question from Jamie in York. Why did Keir Starmer think it was okay to take money away from pensioners and at the same time receive £100,000 in donations? I'm not quite sure you can sort of link the two things in that way, but that's what Jamie's done. John?
I think it's a huge misstep, really, and I can't quite understand it. I can't really square it away with the Keir Starmer that I kind of observed in opposition. And it just feels, I mean, I think there are, it just feels wrong. I mean, just don't take the suits, don't take the glasses, don't, if you're Prime Minister, maybe you have to sacrifice something and you don't go to Arsenal games quite so often.
That would be a sacrifice too far for any Arsenal supporter, of which I am not one.
Well, I'm not one either, so I find it quite easy to say.
No, but isn't the point that he hasn't broken any rules? He's declared it all. I think there was something to do with his wife where they didn't quite do it properly, but they then rectified that. I mean, do you not feel that this has been blown out of all proportion?
Well, I don't think it's on the same level as, say, some of Boris Johnson's sort of freebie holidays to Mustique, and, we had Lord Brownlow funding the renovation of his Downing Street flat. And I think a Labour leader has got to understand that a lot of the media are inherently suspicious of a Labour government and will be looking for things to go at him for. So you've got to be cleaner than clean, I think. And just obeying the rules sometimes isn't enough.
Lucy, I imagine this was a question that you might have expected, or some version of it. This has been going.
Which I've answered many times.
Well, I'm sure you have, but not on this. You haven't.
No, it's fine.
But it's something that's been dragging on now for weeks and seems to have really had a bit of cut through among the general public. I mean, he's announced this week he's repaid £6,000 of it, which I thought was an odd thing to do, because it says people just automatically think, well, what about the rest of it? And if you're saying you've done nothing wrong, why would you repay any money anyway?
Well, are we talking now about that or the Winterfield payment? Yeah. I mean, okay. I mean, look, I think we all understand how these things sort of look and have come across, and I think that's why the Prime Minister wants to be sort of clear that the rules will be tightened and are being tightened in terms of ministers, and I think that's important. And the principles are around transparency, and that's the reason everyone knows about this, is because these things have been declared in the way that they have. And just to put that into context, and it's not a sort of an excuse or anything for it, but obviously when you're in opposition, what you have to declare has to have values put on it in a way that when you're a minister, it doesn't. So that's why you're not comparing like with like. No, so on the list that was produced about how much people got in hospitality and gifts, obviously there were no Tory ministers on from that same period at all, because the ministerial transparency is very different. So it doesn't have a value assigned to it. So I was at some of these. I was Shadow Culture Secretary. I was at many of these events.
You had an excuse.
Yeah, but he was the leader of the opposition. Yeah. So you're representing your party, you're representing the opposition, you're at an official event. You get told afterwards, oh, this is the value we've worked out for that. Some things are £4,000 to go to the BAFTAs or something, and then you're going to something else the next day and it's £300. I mean, so those things you're sort of given afterwards. So ministers don't have to assign those values. I'm not making an excuse, but I'm just saying that that's why opposition MPs, their numbers, if you like, look much higher. But transparency is really important. That's why we're now going to make it so that ministers do also have to assign a value and have to abide by the same rules, so that people will be able to see that and judge that going forward. The really important issue about these things is there a perceived or is there an actual conflict of interest, people who get undue policy or other influence for having, conferred these gifts or hospitality on you? And what I would say is judge the government by its actions. We are now bringing in a football regulator, for example, which the Premier League have been sort of pushing and arguing against, for example. Tomorrow in Parliament, we're doing second reading of the Renters' Rights Bill, absolutely taking on the landlord lobby, if you like, and putting once in a generation rights back into the hands of renters and ordinary people. Later this week, we're bringing the Employment Rights Bill in, the biggest transformation of workers' rights for a generation.
But all of these things...
So it's taking on the vested interest, is what I'm saying. And I think the perception is that actually these corporate vested interests then have undue, which they did under the previous government. The Renters' Rights Bill was watered down and delayed time after time because of the landlord lobby. The Football Regulation Bill was delayed endlessly.
I don't recall any Tory donor having a pass to number 10, though, which is what Lord Ali had, given that he donated to Sue Gray's son's parliamentary election campaign. He was the one that donated the money for the clothes and the spectacles and whatever. And of course, journalists are now digging into his background and saying, well, what interest has he got that he might want the government to change policy on? Now, I've always taken the view that donors of all political parties, most of them do it for philanthropic reasons. But in this case, and obviously Lord Ali has been a Labour supporter for donkey's years, and it seems, from what I can see, to be liked by everybody, and there was never any suspicion that he's done anything wrong. But why this has cut through seems to me to be the fact that Keir Starmer and his wife have a joint income of over £200,000, and yet they needed somebody to pay for their clothes, and ordinary people just don't get that.
And I understand that, and I understand how that looks. I mean, and I haven't had this conversation with them, but my own sort of perception of that would be that actually, you know, you're in this intensity of the public spotlight. You know, the spouse of a prime minister or want to be prime minister gets an extra spotlight, especially when they're a woman, especially when they're Labour. I actually don't think this would have been about the money. I think it would have been about the fact that somebody went out, picked them, curated them, you know, styled somebody, which sort of does happen to people in public life. They have stylists, they have people who advise them on that. I don't think it would have actually been about the fact that it costs money.
Okay.
But I understand how that looks.
Cindy?
It is a bit about the fact that it costs money. I think, you know, when you look at the breakdown of Starmer's freebies, for example, he's got £32,000 worth of suits. I don't know if that's one suit, two suits, or hundreds of suits, but that's a lot of free suits to be taken. And at some point, surely you think, is this what I came into politics to do? Is this the image that I want to get across? And, you know, into something that you were talking about earlier about the declarations. Part of the reason this has got so big is because at the beginning they weren't declared properly. Some of the freebies, at least, weren't always declared.
No, that's not really the case. I mean, that isn't
not really the case. I mean, sometimes there were freebies not declared at the very beginning because they were confused about the rules. That was how it came out in the summer.
No, actually, you know, Keir and his team were clarifying a bit about what they actually needed to declare, but within the time frame, and then the declarations were made. So these things have all been declared transparently, and, you know, as John said, I mean, that does stand in stark contrast to what happened before, when the previous Prime Minister didn't declare loans that he'd received and other kind of gifts that he'd received at that point, and then went on to give, you know, significant public sector jobs to people who'd been involved in that arrangement. And I don't really think it compares at all with what happened with the mates rates fast lanes in the COVID.
How do you explain
PPE.
Lord Ali's number 10 pass?
Well, look, that was temporary for a very short, I think, a matter of 1 or 2 days at the beginning. Lord Ali, I know he's come in for a lot of the spotlight. Obviously, he's been a Labour member of the House of Lords for 25 years. He's in effect a Labour politician. He happens to be a wealthy one, but he's a Labour politician who has got no kind of policy skin in that game or any other influence. He was, I think, my understanding is, sort of helping with that immediate sort of, how do we...
But neither did Lord Brownlow, a Tory peer, who gave Boris Johnson the money, gave or lent, I can't remember the details, to redo the Downing Street flat. And he had no desire for any change in the law on anything. It was just a philanthropic thing. But the Labour Party gave him hell for that.
Well, no. The issue with that was it wasn't declared. And he was, and Boris Johnson was actually found by the Standards Commissioner and the Standards Committee to be in breach of the rules for having not declared that. That had to be dragged out months later. So that was the issue there. There was no issue, kind of, I don't remember at the time, something about was Brownlow. And then the guy who had brokered that loan was then, a few days later, having brokered the loan, was made the chairman of the BBC, an appointment made by Boris Johnson, and having not gone through any independent process.
Okay.
So I don't find that equivalent. I mean, look, I'm not saying we haven't got some things to get right and answer, and I understand the perception, but I do reject and refute the idea these things are equivalent. They've been declared. That's why we're talking about them, because they have been declared.
David?
Well, I think, first of all, this is another vivid example of how nowadays, the personal is political, and you can't escape that. And what surprises me most about all this was that when it blew up, that wasn't the moment when, of course, even if he had complied with all the rules, he just thought politically, this is so bad, I need to grip it now. And the way it's rumbled on, for anybody who's involved in politics, we all know that, and it is painful. And I've seen this in government, saying, we've got this wrong, we need to fess up now, we need to do something sufficiently big and bold to kill the story, because we have to recognise that the public are right and we're wrong, and it doesn't matter if we've complied with the detail of the rules. That's just not how the public sees it. Why a party that was so effective in opposition took about 2 months to go through a process that should have taken 2 days is what I find most extraordinary after it blew up.
Right, we'll move on to other questions in just a few moments' time. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
President Biden has warned Hurricane Milton could be the worst to hit Florida in a century. Forecasters say it will likely expand in size but maintain intensity when it hits the state tomorrow. The head of the MI5 says it's responded to 20 plots backed by Iran since 2022. In a rare speech, Ken McCallum also says Russia has been determined to cause mayhem on the streets of the UK. And MPs have a new favourite in the Tory leadership race. James Cleverly's overtaken Robert Jenrick at the top, with Kemi Badenoch now bottom and Tom Tugendhat out. LBC weather: scattered heavy showers tonight will clear for many by dawn. Patchy rain continuing in the northeast, but drier for the northwest and a low of 4 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33 on LBC. Lucy Powell, David Willetts, Cindy Yu and John Crace with me answering your questions. Here's a WhatsApp question from Usman in Ealing. New stats show immigration has fueled the largest population increase in at least 50 years. Is this a direct result of Brexit? Much attention is focused on small boats, but they account for only a small part of the overall immigration issue. Now, by way of a bit of background, figures from the ONS have showed the UK population increased by 1% in the year leading up to summer 2020. 2023, with net migration responsible for this entire increase, given more people died than were born in the UK as well. This 1% increase is the largest population growth seen since the ONS started keeping records of this in the early 1970s. So, David Willetts, is this a result of Brexit?
Well, Brexit certainly hasn't helped, and the whole kind of points-based system that we've now got for supposedly controlling immigration hasn't really been working. And I think you could have had, I voted Remain. I think you could have had a model where you had a European market and very tight controls on people coming from outside Europe, which I still think would have been a better model. But I think the one angle on all this that people should remember is it doesn't mean that every single person in this country has a right to settle here and is here permanently. So if you have got a lot of people, an increasing number of people coming into this country for whatever reason, be they Ukrainian refugees who escaping the appalling Russian invasion, but maybe hoping to get back to Ukraine in the future, or indeed increasing numbers of people wanting to study at British universities, but then we rightly expect them to go back home afterwards, that could look like an increase in the population, but it's not the same as an increase in the number of people coming here to settle.
And should we be worried by the fact that 16,000 more people died than were born in this country in that year? And it's the first time that's happened for, presumably a very long time.
We have now a very low number of babies being born. It's gone below 600,000, which is extraordinarily low. Now, you have to get this delicate territory. It is not, I don't think it's acceptable for men in particular to sit around saying women should have more babies. That is hopeless. I'm not going to get I'm not going there. What I will say is I do think a society should create an environment where people who wish to have children feel able to do so and are not saying because we can't afford a house or because it's because we're still living with my parents, we can't have kids. And there is some evidence that people are not fulfilling the hopes they have to have children. And I think that then means that, public policy on everything from housing costs to the tax system needs to be more supportive. But it isn't a matter of telling people they've got to go off and breed for Britain. That is hopeless.
I don't know why the word fecund is coming to mind here. It's a horrible word, isn't it? Lucy?
Well, as somebody around the panel who's given my fair share to the economy by having enough children, and I don't want any more, thank you.
How many?
Well, two of my own and a stepchild who has always lived with us since he was younger, so who's now 20. So they're, they'll contribute. They're still starting to contribute.
Well done, you.
Yes, thank you. That's on the back of me.
Yes.
But yeah, look, David's right. I think the immigration numbers have been too high for sort of too long, and there are many sort of policy failures underneath that. Some is around, as David said, around the sort of ageing population and the low birth rates, and there's various sort of policies not just around the housing crisis and living standards falling and all those things that would put people off, because having children is very expensive, I can say, as someone halfway through that really dramatically impacts on the rest of your life's living standards, having children, but also about the gender pay gap. If you take a career break or if you come out of work at the sort of wrong point, or maternity leave, it can have a serious impact on the remainder of your career as a woman, and many women fear that and don't want to sort of take that risk. We've also had a real failure of skills policy in this country and training enough.
That's right, Jackie Smith's got it in hand.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a straight direct line into her on that.
Your friend Jackie.
But it's really important. She's doing a fantastic job in government and she's got a big job to do. But that skills gap and actually training enough people up from this country and in this country to do the jobs that need filling, so that we don't have to rely on people coming in from abroad to do that. These are all some of the failures of policy over many years. And we, as a new incoming government, we are committed to addressing some of that and bringing the net migration figures down. But that is a huge task over a long period of time, but something that we are committed to doing.
Cindy?
Two parts of your question, Ian. One is about immigration, one is about birth rates. I mean, on the birth rates, I think both David and Lucy are very right about the multi-factors that go into why birth rates are declining. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is housing. You know, the fact that generationally, people of the millennial generation, for example, are proportionally much more likely to still be living with their parents at the age of 30 than having their own home. I mean, it's just something that older generations haven't had to do. And how are you meant to start a family when you're still living at home and can't buy your own house? It's kind of crazy. So I'm hoping that the Labour government will build, and
we are
try to solve that problem. And then on the immigration question, I think it's symptomatic of the fact that this country voted for Brexit. The Conservatives saw through that Brexit, but spent so much time on the arguments and then on the psychodrama. And obviously, COVID was a massive, outside factor, but it never really looked at why people voted for Brexit in a way that actually would translate to policy. You know, people talked about taking control of the borders, but actually what Brexit was also just this giant cry for help, in the sense that people's lives were not better and they were worried that it was the immigrants that was the problem. And that immigration question has never been properly tackled head on. And that's why we're now got people like Robert Jenrick talking about leaving the ECHR. It's just leave everything you can until you solve the immigration problem. But actually, you're not really looking at that.
And he voted Remain.
We're not really looking at why people feel that immigrants are out there competing for the things that they're doing. What about, going back to housing, what about the local issues that mean that there are left behind regions? Are they really the problems of immigrants, or actually are they problems of things like falling productivity, rising inflation, whatever it is that are more domestic issues? I find it very tricky because, and until we tackle that problem, it's just going to be leave every single international institution that we can, because people feel like that's the next scapegoat.
John Crace.
I pretty much agree with you, Cindy. I mean, on terms of immigration, I think the country has not been having an adult conversation about it. And by that, I mean the previous Tory government had not had a serious conversation about it, because we actually needed a lot of people to come in and do the jobs that no one else were doing. I mean, we kind of talk about we want a properly funded, properly staffed care system for the elderly, and to a large extent those jobs were taken up by immigrants, really, because British people either didn't want to do it or weren't trained to do it. So there is this mismatch of skills and people coming in. And also, there was an advantage to having many people coming in, because it skewed the GDP figures. Because the more people you got coming in, the sort of GDP looks higher, unless you do it per capita, in which case it suddenly goes lower again. But we measure GDP as a whole.
OK. We've got lots of other subjects to cover, so I think I'm going to go to an early break. It's 8:42.
This is LBC.
It's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:44, Lucy Powell, David Willetts, Cindy Yu and John Crace with me taking your questions. Here's one from Jen in Camden. Israel is now attacking Syria as well as Gaza and Lebanon. Is Netanyahu just an irresponsible warmonger? Now, the Syrian state media claims 7 civilians have been killed and 11 others injured in an Israeli airstrike on a residential building in the same part of the capital city of Damascus as the Iranian embassy. Lucy.
Well, I mean, I don't know about this, and I think, it's not particularly helpful for the British government, to sort of offer a complete sort of running commentary on every sort of reported incident or otherwise. But obviously, the situation in the Middle East at the moment is incredibly concerning. There is an escalation, but we want to see a de-escalation as quickly as possible, and that's why we're working very, very closely with international partners in Europe and America and in the region to try and get that de-escalation, pull things back from the brink and move us on to a situation of a ceasefire where we can begin to repair some of the damage that's been caused by the conflict that's ensued over the last year.
I mean, if they are trying to hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and it seems from this report that that's what they were trying to do, is that a legitimate target in the aim of self-defence?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on something I don't know about, and I don't think that would be helpful in any case. But look, what we've been clear about is that we want to see a de-escalation, and that's absolutely vital that we do that. That while Israel does have a right to defend itself, and obviously we saw Iran kind of raining down on Israel just a few days ago with missiles and so on. That has to be done within international law, and we've been really clear about that as well. So actions do have to be conducted within the confines of agreed and understood international law. But the most important thing is that we all cool heads prevail here, and we do get the de-escalation that's needed, because this is a very, very worrying situation.
Cindy.
I mean, first of all, caveat to say that I'm not a Middle East expert at all, and Iain, as you know, I do know a little bit more about China, and that's why I'm always kind of wary to comment on complicated foreign issues when I know that I don't know enough about it.
Luckily, I have no such reservation.
And that's why you do the job that you do. But I think, as in my understanding, Israel is targeting Syria because of its links to Iran and Hezbollah, and it seems that Netanyahu is clearly going for this kind of root and stem outing of Hezbollah's various capabilities. Having killed Nasrallah, he is now going after Nasrallah's successors, so that you can't have this kind of monster sprouting different heads. Terrorism, though, just doesn't seem that easily got rid of when it comes to this kind of issue. If you think about Hezbollah's origins in the last century anyway, it came from Israel's actions against Lebanon. So what I worry about, and this goes to the MI5 warning today as well about terrorist threats in the future, is just the seeding of radicalism in the years to come by having almost, indiscriminate is a value-laden term, but very high civilian collateral in the actions that you are taking. So Netanyahu may be succeeding his military operations now in the 12 months since October 7th, but I do wonder what the situation is going to look like in 5-10 years, whether people are going to look back at this point and think, actually, this kind of root and stem pretty much almost indiscriminate, certainly very high civilian cost approach will actually seed more problems in the future. Having said that, what is the solution to these issues? And John and I were talking about this in the green room. This region, there are so many intractable interests that I'm very wary that I'm sitting here in London trying to kind of almost analyse what they're doing. I mean, there are intractable interests here.
Well, for someone who professes not to know anything about it, I thought that was a very good answer. John?
Cindy and I were talking about it earlier, and I was in the House of Commons yesterday when Keir Starmer, to a packed House of Commons, gave a very measured, very sombre statement to mark the year anniversary of October the 7th. And he said all the right things. We need to, the hostages must be returned, there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be a two-state solution. And, you suddenly realised the limits of international diplomacy here, because the
failure of international diplomacy.
Well, I think it's the limits, because the fact is that you can say whatever you like to Hezbollah, Hamas, and to Israel, and to Iran, but they're not listening. They are operating to a completely different agenda, one that doesn't sort of comply with our understanding of how world politics should work. You know, reason has long since left the building in this one. And I just kind of fear that, you know, we are about to see an all-out war in the Middle East. You know, I think it's not that far away, because, you know, I think Iran would be up for it, and Israel looks like they're up for it. And it's thoroughly depressing. And all that, you know, we here in Britain can do is say, this must stop. But we are in no position to stop anything, as far as I can see.
David?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, given that this week is the anniversary, I mean, we have to start by saying it was horrific what happened a year ago, and that's led to, obviously, deep anger and grief in Israel. But I thought Cindy was absolutely right. And, you know, I've been to the West Bank, and it is all the time. It's an absolute tinderbox, you know. It is so... There are
It's got that feeling, hasn't it?
Yeah, and all the walls and the armed settlers and the unhappy, deeply unhappy Palestinians. It is a circumstances where whoever you kill now, in 10 years' time, there will be another generation of angry young men who provide a threat to Israel. And I think, I have to say, John says there's no pressure anyone can exert. This is ultimately a challenge for the US. The only agent that does have the power is the US, and the closest in the last 40 years we've got to settlements have been heavily driven by closely engaged American presidents willing to put pressure on Israel, but also extract conditions so that America is protected. And the question is whether America, after some of the disasters of its engagement in the Middle East, would ever be willing to take on that kind of role again.
And this is where China does come into it, actually. So I can speak a bit more confidently about this, where China does want to have a bigger role in the region, but without all of the costs of the global policeman. So it wants the US to have less impact in the region. It itself has gone to Saudi Arabia and Iran, struck that deal in recent years, which was the beginning of a peace accord. But it doesn't actually want to take that responsibility of the global policeman, because that's so costly. And so here is another major global player adding to the complicated dimensions here, because it's not clear anymore that US hegemony is you can take for granted.
Why does China want to be involved in the Middle East?
Various reasons. Mainly it's energy. China really fears for its energy security, which is what also drives its position on Russia as well. Again, America underlies all of this. It worries that America or American allies can choke off its energy supplies through maritime routes, so it needs to find all of these different alternative routes.
Okay. Right. This is a question from Oliver in Stockwell. It looks like HS2 will go into central London now, but still not any further north than Birmingham. What will it take for politicians to care about the north? John Crace, do you have any northern links?
Not really, I'm afraid. Having lived in London for the last 40 years, I can't really claim that. It did seem to me completely daft to build an HS2 between London and Birmingham just in and of itself, because you can get to Birmingham in an hour and 12 minutes, basically, by an ordinary Avanti West Coast train, assuming it's actually running. And I don't feel that sort of lopping 15 minutes off that really makes a great deal of difference to productivity. All the real gains, I thought, were going up as far as Manchester or into the other fork up to Leeds. And so we're now left with what I see as bit of a kind of white elephant. No one really knows what to do with it. We've got kind of sunk cost fallacy here because we've invested so much in it, billions and billions of pounds that we can't pull out. On the other hand, I think it is the right decision to go on to Euston rather than end in Old Oak Common.
That's the reason I guess this question's been asked, because the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, has more than hinted, I think, that the previous government's decision to scrap the link between Old Oak Common in West London and Euston in central London will be reversed very soon. However, there have not been any hints that the cancellation of the Birmingham to Manchester link will likewise be reversed. I'm sure I read somewhere that it can't be reversed because a lot of the land that had been purchased has now been sold off again, which slightly beggars belief, given that they knew that there was likely to be a change in government. David Willetts.
Yeah, look, I actually went up to Manchester on a Vanti today, and the train was only 10 minutes late when I got back to Euston.
Marvellous. That's a result.
Needs
oh my God, what a terrible station.
The permanent sort of frozen building site we've got at Euston is a total disaster. I have to say, one of the lessons from all this is the dangers of chopping and changing. And I think we should have stuck myself with the original plan, which made strategic sense and was at least as much a capacity argument as a speed argument, actually. We got bogged down in the speed. And the French still refer proudly to 2 days in the spring of 1975. And on the first day, President Pompidou decided that France should have its train grand vitesse, which they went ahead and built. And on the second day, he decided they needed to have a network of civil nuclear power stations on one design, and they should build those, and they did. And we have had far too much chopping and changing. We've had it in the past. We've already, I have to say, had some public investment capital projects cancelled by the new Labour government, which I also regret. If we could just take some decisions and stick to them, that would be so much better.
Lucy.
Well, look, I'm going to correct you here, Ian, because it's actually Oliver in Stockport, not Stockwell. You're showing your
did
London...
I say Stockwell?
Yeah,
did I?
You're showing your kind of London bias.
That'll teach me to have you there where you can see the screen.
So you'll be able to see the screen throughout.
As a regular visitor to Stockport Station, as well as Euston Station and Manchester Piccadilly, as I am, I know how woeful the transport is in the north, the transport infrastructure and connectivity across the north. It would not, most Londoners would be absolutely sort of shocked at the connectivity, capacity and sort of infrastructure that we have in the north. And the HS2 line was
very cheap taxis though in Manchester.
And friendly. Very friendly as well. And a lot of them listen to the LBC, I can say, yeah. So I'm sure they know you and give you extra special service. But look,
freebies.
The HS2 was part of that necessary infrastructure. It wasn't about connecting the northern towns and cities, but it was about adding extra capacity, which would free up capacity elsewhere for the north. And it was a big mistake when the previous government sort of cancelled it at will. As you say, that led to a lot of decisions that meant it's hard to reverse that overnight. But the embarrassment of Euston really is now, as you say, half the work's been done. It is a building site around it and into it. So hopefully it's something that we can resolve. But as David says, as a regular visitor to France, every time we go to France, there seems to be a new high-speed train line, and it's so embarrassing that in this country we can't develop and stick with these big infrastructure projects. And I know that's something that Lou Haigh and the new government will hopefully put right.
I suspect what she was doing today, though, because it doesn't seem to have been endorsed by the rest of the government. For all we know, she's got some rather tough negotiations going on with the Treasury, and she's trying to announce something so it can't be reversed.
Yeah, there wasn't
it's rather odd. It wasn't a government statement.
No.
Lucy, any comment on that one?
Well, to be fair, I think this was an interview she did with LBC this morning, which I
we're to blame, aren't we?
Yeah. And I think she got probed on it quite a bit. I don't know what the situation is there, but I know Lou will.
Cindy is ceding her time on this one because we are really near the end of the hour, so you can literally each only have 30 seconds on this. From Andrea in Billinghurst, West Sussex.
That is south.
Not Billingham.
Yeah.
Companies now think 57 is too old to be hiring someone for a new job. Why is this country so resentful towards older generations? Now, research by the recruitment website Total Jobs has found almost half of companies think 57 is too old to be considered for a new role. Now, I don't imagine you've reached that age yet, David, but what do you think?
Say the sweetest things here. Well, I agree. I think it's shocking. But I can say, as a member of the House of Lords, that it doesn't apply in the House of Lords. I became a member of the House of Lords at the age of 60, and people said it was great to have fresh young talent.
John Crace.
Well, as someone who is 68 tomorrow.
No.
Thank you.
Thank goodness it wasn't today, otherwise we'd have to sing happy birthday.
I'm all in favour of old people working. And actually, the Guardian gave me the job. They moved me up from the features department up to the parliamentary sketch writer when I was 57. So
you're living proof. This is total rubbish. Cindy?
Well, my new boss is 57, so I do believe that it's a great age to be starting any new job.
Oh, honestly.
Imagine
having to creep to Michael Gove.
No.
Michael,
Imagine Lucy.
are you listening?
Honestly.
Now, as somebody nowhere near 57.
Well, do you know what? Like John, it's my birthday this week, and I'm turning 50.
No.
Yeah, I am. So I really hope that 57 isn't too old to start getting a new job, because the electorate might put me out of a new job.
It's a distant memory to some of us, Lucy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure Lord Anley will be paying for a nice birthday party.
Yeah.
That was cruel, wasn't it?
I'm paying for my own birthday party, but I am having one, thank you very much. But no, I think as somebody turning 50 this week, I feel 50 is the new 30. Don't you agree?
Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Right, our fun question from Andy in Kings Lynn. This is quite a difficult one, I think. On-air clips of Thunderbirds from the 60s have been found in a garden shed in Buckinghamshire. What have you found lying around at home, even if it was something you had put there in the first place yourself? Cindy?
I'm somewhat of a beginner hoarder, so I actually find all sorts of things at home because I never throw any things away, like old Christmas cards and birthday cards.
Oh, no.
Stuff. It's nice, though, because occasionally you just look back and sometimes it's sad, but most of the time it's quite nice.
John?
My children are long since grown up and left home, but the last thing remaining is an Action Man that I had when I was about 10 in 1966.
Lucy?
Well, the best thing to find at home, come on, everyone's got to agree, is when you're doing the washing and you find a tenner in your jeans pocket, which is like just brilliant.
As long as it's before it goes into the washing machine.
No, they last.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they're new. They're not like yours. You haven't
know.
held cash for ages, obviously.
No, I just don't do the washing.
Well, probably not. No, they're almost plastic, aren't they now?
Does anyone use cash nowadays?
Well,
I haven't carried cash for literally a year.
Well, I think when you've got kids, well, I mean, they steal the cash from you, obviously, but you do still need a bit of cash.
Coming across photographs of myself with a full head of hair. Excellent. It's always a bit of a shock.
I think you need to share those. I discovered my sweep the other day, Sooty and Sweep.
Oh, yes.
Who I thought I'd lost.
Oh, well, happy days.
It was a very happy day.
Oh, that's nice.
Now, tomorrow's panel includes Labour MP Stella Creasy, another one that should be a government minister, hint, hint, former Conservative MP and Minister Steve Baker, the broadcaster and columnist Anne McElvoy, and the podcaster Gemma Forte. So that should be a spiky one. Thank you to all four of you for being with us tonight. If you missed the beginning of the show, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast, which is released at 11 o'clock every night. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to turn our attention to special educational needs, because the battle over a vital special needs school in Surrey has intensified with the newly elected MP, Liberal Democrat Chris Coughlin, declaring Betchwood Vale Academy must go ahead. Now, it comes as a scrapping of plans for the school has left 90% of local autistic children in Moore Valley facing long daily commutes for appropriate education. Well, I want to ask you about if your child does have special needs, how is the system working for you? Or probably, how isn't it working for you? How would you like to see it improved? Because there are so many people who I think feel nowadays that special educational needs are not catered for in the way that they need to be. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, President Biden's warning Hurricane Milton could be one of the worst storms